Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you the Gina K Grand Garden stamp set. Now, every once in a while, I'll come across a stamp set that I don't want to do anything spectacular with it. I don't want to do any fancy techniques or anything like that. I just want to stamp it and enjoy my time coloring it. And however it turns out is however it turns out. The stamp set certainly fits the bill. So I am going to be sharing with you some pretty basic Copic coloring, and I just kind of wing it as I go, and we'll talk about that here more in just a moment. So this is the, again, Gina K Grand Garden stamp set. This bloom is gorgeous, and as you can see by my card, it takes up a great deal of space on my card front, which I love. The leaves are nice and simple. They're not overdrawn, which I love. They give you lots of room to try different things if you'd like, but you certainly don't have to. And all of those sentiments are fabulous, folks. So I definitely suggest that you check the stamp set out. I have a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock. This is 80 pounds. I have it cut down to 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And I'm going to be stamping this with the Altenew permanent black ink simply because it is Copic friendly. You could use any ink you like. I do like this one, especially if I'm going to be coloring dark, bold colors like this blue. Those black outlines are just a perfect match with those types of colors. I am masking this bloom off with Simon Says Stamp masking paper, and then I'm going to be stamping my leaves on here. I am using my Misty stamping tool because it just kind of makes life a little bit easier. I stamped the first one, then I added 2 of the different style leaves here on my panel. I can stamp those both at once. I am making sure that I mask these off as I go. Simon Says Stamp masking paper is my favorite for this. It's a really great paper. It doesn't soak through. It's wonderful for ink blending. It's just a really nice paper. Plus, it comes off your card panel really well, which is another plus for me, so especially since I do lots and lots of masking. So after I get this stamped on here, then I'm going to choose my Copic colors. Now, I knew immediately when I ordered the stamp set that I was going to be coloring this in blue. I hadn't quite decided what blues, but I knew that I wanted a blue. So when I got the stamp set and I started making my card panel, I really didn't even put any thought into which blues just yet till after I had it stamped. So then I chose the B21, B23, and B26. Now, as I start to lay these down, I kind of decide it's not quite what I'm looking for, and that is the beauty behind Copic markers. They are transparent, so you have lots of wiggle room to change your mind or kind of change things up as you go along. You certainly don't always have to be 100% married to your Copic color choices. Just keep that in mind, folks. Now, there's definitely exceptions to that rule where once you put a color down, that's it. You're kind of committed to it. But more often than not, you can change things up and do different things with it, and that I definitely took advantage of that today. Now, I am familiar enough with my Copic colors, and especially this particular blue combination, that I already have an idea what this is going to look like. However, I didn't want to overly commit to begin with, so lately I have been just skipping out, mapping out my shadow areas with my lightest color. Lately, I've just been going straight in with that dark color and then blending out to my lightest color. But because I already have an idea of what this is going to look like, and I still hadn't decided what I'm going to do about it, I decided to err on the side of caution with this particular image and map out my shadows with my lightest color, which is my B21 here. And everything you'd seen up until this point was in real time. I know folks have been talking about that a lot lately. They like to see me color in real time, so I'm going to try to give you as much of that in this video as I can without taking up too much time. And I did take some time on this image, and that's kind of what I was talking about, where every once in a while I'll come across a stamp set where I just want to color it. There's no pressure there to do anything with it. However it turns out is however it turns out. I just simply want to take my time, color it in. Sometimes Not often, but definitely sometimes I will color in an image and I will decide that I just absolutely hate it. So I'll stamp it again and then I'll color it again. Usually about the second time, I'm pretty happy with it. I don't share those experiences very often, but they do happen. I think one of the things that I enjoy about card making is none of it has to be perfect. Your coloring doesn't have to be perfect. Your cards don't have to be perfect. This really, at the end of the day, folks, is about using your creative brain for the enjoyment of just simply using your creative brain. There's no pressure there. Nobody cares. They're beautiful. You've done something artistic, you've done something creative, and that's perfect. Okay, so after I had everything mapped out with my B21, I am back to real time here, folks, so you can kind of get a little bit better idea of what it is I'm doing here. After I mapped that out with my B21, this is my B26. Now, this would be my darkest shadow color. Now, I already knew that this was going to be a little bit too bright for what I had in my mind's eye. This is a large image and it can handle a lot of deep, dark colors. It can handle quite a bit of contrast. So I knew that I had wanted to play that up quite a bit. The B26 wasn't quite doing it for me. I got about halfway through it to make certain that this wasn't what I wanted. And then I decided to bring in my BV25. And now I'm going to speed this up because I'm just going to go directly over everything that I had done with that B26. The B26 is going directly over the top of everything I had done with the B21. I'm just going to go over the top of that. And I'm using just really loose flicking motions. I'm not completely covering everything up I had just done. I'm keeping it pretty loose. At this point, I just want dark. Now, I also knew that that BV25 wasn't going to be quite enough. So I'm going to bring in the B69. This B69 is a dark blue, but without the BV25, it again is still really bright. It's darker than the B26, but probably about as bright as the the B26. So that BV25 really helps tie these two in together. And again, because I am just coloring this because I want to, I can use as many colors as I want. I can take as long as I want to color this in. There's no deadlines here. There's no pressure. So I'm just going to keep mixing those colors until I get what I want. Now, because I am familiar with my Copic colors, I already know for the most part what results I'm going to get when, but every once in a while, it's nice to just put it down on paper and experiment with it. So I finished mapping everything out with that BV25, got that in there. This is going to help mute those brighter blues. It's still going to read nice and blue. It's just going to be a little bit more on the muted side, so it's going to look quite a bit darker down there in those nooks and crannies. And then I'm going to go back over this with my B69. At this point, I think I speed almost everything up for you guys because it's going to get pretty long if I don't. As you could see, when I was coloring this in, I was going really slow. Like there was nothing about it that was making me speed up in any way. I wanted to make sure that I was getting those lines in there, getting that depth and shadow in there where I wanted it, so this would read as a more three-dimensional flower. So now I'm coming in with that B69, and then I'm going to start working my way back out to my lightest color. Again, I'm just using those flicking motions. I had someone ask me a couple weeks ago how I decide where to put in my shadows, where to put in my highlights. So take a look at this where I'm putting in those darker blues here, folks. Anything that sits behind something else is going to get a shadow. Now I'm using a direct light source. So you're looking at this straight on. The light source would be coming at it straight on, not from the left, not from the right. So I'm coloring it in as such. So anything that is underneath something else gets a shadow. Anything that curves back away from the eye also gets a shadow. This is actually a really great stamp set to practice with if you're struggling with that at all. These lines are really simple. They're not over illustrated. There isn't any dips or folds or extra bends in it that can sometimes be a little confusing to decipher when you're trying to color them in. It's a pretty straightforward image. So again, where two lines connect, anything that folds back, anything that is underneath another part of the image gets a shadow. Anything coming forward, anything that curves up, that is going to be a highlight. Now, there's definitely midtones in here that you need to keep an eye out for, but that is also just a matter of making sure that you're giving yourself plenty of white space here in the end. The more white space you give yourself, the more room you have to add more color. And as you can see, the tips of my petals are still pretty white, but I'm actually at my mid-tone here. This is my B23. I did go in and blend out that B69 a little bit with the B26. At this point, I can afford to do so because I'm getting closer to the tips of those petals. I do want those to be brighter than what I want in those nooks and crannies. So I could still use that B26. I didn't need to skip it altogether. I could still use it, and I did. And now I'm coming in with my B23. This is what would be considered my mid-tone and also my second to last color, and I still have lots of white there on those tips. As soon as I am done blending this out, I'm going to bring in that B21. Now, you have a couple of options here. You can go super duper light-handed with your lightest color and leave a lot of that nice stark white, or you can color it in like I am. I actually had just refilled this B21, so it's going to blend all of those colors back quite a bit. Now, I'm not going completely over the B69 or the BV25. There's no need for that. I don't need to blend in my shadow areas. Those are just fine. They need to stay dark. They don't need to be blended out. But I am going over that B21 and just a teensy bit into that B26. Now, because I had just refilled my marker, it is going to make those kind of knock back just a tiny bit, and that's okay. I have a fix for that as well, just stay tuned for that. Now, I do want these to go just a little bit darker in those nooks and crannies. So this is where I'm bringing in that C5. I am not going over the top of everything that I had just done with that B69 and that V25. I am going with really loose flicking motions. There's some variation in the lengths of those lines. I'm leaving plenty of gap in between those lines. So as you look at this, it does get darker to the eye. However, if you look close enough, you'll see that some of those lines read a darker gray and some of them don't. And that's exactly the look that I was going for. It's perfect. Plus, it's also a really great way to add more dimension to something without having to put a lot of effort into it. Now, closer to the center of that flower where those are a little bit tighter, I did not do any flicking motions there, but I did take the tip of my C5 and I just drew in some really fine, thin lines with that just so they do read a little bit darker. And then again, I have another trick that I'm going to do here in a few moments where I'm going to make those highlights pop that much more. So between the variation of my highlights and the depth of my shadows and those nice deep midtones of those blues, this flower will really pop when I'm done. So I thought I had recorded coloring in the leaves. I had not. This is the downside to now having my craft space in our bedroom because my husband likes to chat with me all of a sudden. So I turned off the camera to talk to him, forgot to turn it back on, and then realized I didn't have it back on. So I stamped another one real quick for you folks so you can see this. This is the easiest way I feel to color in a leaf ever, and this works on, I would say, a good majority of leaf images out there. So I really wanted to show you this. I mapped this out with my G29. This is my darkest shadow color, and I am literally making this look like the shape of a Christmas tree, because we have that line down there, the center, we have the veins coming up the side of it, and I really want to play those up. Plus, once you get done coloring this in, those variations in colors are just awesome. After I was done with that G29, I went in with the G17. Now I have the G14. Now on leaves like this, I love when that G14, it's an apple green. I love it when the eye catches the majority of that one color. It really makes those leaves pop. Plus it's a super nice contrast to that G29. So I did go pretty heavy-handed with that G14 and it's perfect. Now I have my G12. If you follow me, you're probably starting to wonder why I don't use any other colors. To be honest, folks, I'm lazy. I don't want to get anything else out. These sit on top all the time, so this is what I reach for, and 90% of the time it works great. I went in with that G12 and I went from the tips of it towards the center. I did not blend anything else out with it because that variation always looks spectacular. Now I'm going to get ready to finish up this card, and I like me a faux frame. I don't know what it is. I just really like a faux frame. You could use anything you want with this. If you have dies, you could definitely use the shape of a die. I'll link to some videos down below as well as over my blog on cards. I've done that in the past, but getting out your T-ruler is the quickest and easiest way to accomplish a faux frame, so that's what I'm doing here. I want this to go at a diagonal because I really want to play up the diagonal stamping of my images here. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this on my grid pad and making sure that I give myself enough space, that I have enough for a drop shadow within the frame, but I'll talk about that here more in just a minute. The most important thing is you make sure that your frame is even all the way across, because once you start coloring this in, you'll notice that it's crooked. So my primary concern here isn't so much that what I'm going to do with it as long as it's even. So I'm kind of taking my time here and making sure that I have everything spaced just how I need it. Now, the other thing that I'm keeping in mind is how these leaves are going to fall within this faux frame. I kind of want it to look like it is sitting kind of within the faux frame on a portion of my image, but also hanging outside of it. So when I'm done with my shadows and coloring this in, it looks like there's more dimension going on underneath the image, not just within the image. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you'll see more of what I'm talking about as soon as I'm done. So now that I have that drawn in and I'm happy with it, everything looks even, everything looks groovy. I know that it's going to look exactly how I want it to when I'm done. I can start coloring in my drop shadow, but I'm just going to start with the drop shadow on my flower here. This is real time, so you guys get an idea of how long it takes me to color things in. I'm not a speed colorer, folks. It might seem that way when I speed things up, but I'm really not. I really do take my time and let my eye register what I'm doing as I'm coloring it before I commit. It definitely helps a bunch and making mistakes down the road. All right, so I'm going to speed this up here. I'm coming in with my C5. This is my darkest shadow color, and I am not focused on a light source at all. On some of this, it kind of looks like I'm coming in from the top right. Some of it looks like I'm coming in from the top left. I'm just kind of looking at where I can add that shadow, where it's going to make the biggest impact. So this is a large image. I can afford to add a lot of shadow to this. In fact, I want a decent amount of shadow on this because it is so large. It is so dark and bold that I can totally get away with that. So for example, those two leaves here on the left, you wouldn't necessarily have a drop shadow running from the very top tip of that leaf that's on the top there down to the bottom tip of that bottom leaf. You would probably have it either on one side or the other. So either on the top of the bottom leaf or on the bottom of the top leaf, not generally on both, but I don't care. I'm going to add it anyways because I can, and it'll still look fine. So, definitely do whatever pleases you folks. Do whatever feels right for you. Nothing is ever going to be wrong. It's always going to turn out fabulous. So after I had gone in with that C5, I blended it out with the C3, then I blended it out with the C1. Now I have my C00, and at this point, I am definitely using more of the nib of my marker than I had with the previous colors, and I'm kind of just setting it on top of those previous inks, and I'm just kind of swiping it. Hopefully you could see that even though I had it sped up. I'm blending that back. I still want it to be dark, but I I definitely want a nice smooth blend on that. Now I did have some harsher edges, so I did end up coming in with my colorless blender. If you follow me at all, you're familiar with this process. If you don't mind those harsh edges on your drop shadow, then by all means don't even worry about bringing in that colorless blender. Now that I have my drop shadow done on my flower, I am going to bring in an EK Success writing pen here, and I'm going to go right over the top of those penciled lines. I'm making sure that I have this lined up pretty well. I did choose the size of pen that would match the illustrated lines of the stamp. Now, you definitely don't need to do that. I prefer that look. I don't like to have one line thicker than the other. However, if I were to choose, I would make sure the line on my image is thicker than the line that I'm drawing in, but that's just my personal preference. You can do whatever you like. All right, so I thought that I would just do a drop shadow, just a simple drop shadow within inside this faux frame. Typically, that's what I do. However, as I started coloring it in, I decided why not just color in the whole thing? It adds quite a bit more color to this panel, but I don't think that it takes away at all from the image. So I just decided to go for the gold. I went in with that C5, blended that out with a C3, went in with the C1, and right there in the middle, I'm going in with that C00. Now, at this point, I kind of play around with this a little bit because after I got done with the first round of colors, I decided it wasn't quite dark enough around those edges there. I really wanted those to have quite a bit more depth and shadow to them, so it did recede back quite a bit. So I bring in that C5 a little bit more, again blend that out with the C3, go in with that C1, and then go in with my C00. Now, because that is a wider space when you're coloring that in, folks, do keep in mind if you don't have enough Copic color in the marker, you're going to get some pretty heavy duty streaks. So if you're going to do this, do be sure that your Copics have plenty of ink in them. So I do want to go just a little bit darker in those darker shadow areas. You know, I had actually done a card a couple years ago. I used an Altenew stamp set, and I'll have it linked down below. It was before I was doing YouTube videos, so I don't have a video for it. But I think when I bought the stamp set, that's the card that I had in mind. So, and I think it's always stuck with me. It was the same color scheme, and it is one of my favorite cards that I'd ever done. And so again, I think when I bought the stamp set, I kind of had that going on in my head. So as I was coloring this in, I kept thinking, it's not dark enough, it's not deep enough. And then I went back and I looked at that other card, and that was why. It's because I had put so much depth and dimension into that other one. I really wanted to see that in this particular card. All right, so I stamped the sentiment on there using my Misty stamping tool so I could make sure that I get it straight, because otherwise I do not. And here's at the point where I really want to play up those highlights on the tips of those. So I am using a Derwent drawing pencil. This is Chinese white. This is a pretty opaque pencil, folks. If you're going to use this pencil, once you're committed, you're committed. It is, however, a super great pencil. It is awesome for highlights and some other techniques. I've been reaching for this a ton lately. If you don't have this pencil, a Prismacolor Premier white colored pencil will work just fine. However, this, again, it works super duper. I always love how my highlights turn out with that. I am sticking strictly to the tips of these petals here. Now, I am going to have to go back in and trace over my image here because this white pencil is so white that I do end up going over some of those black lines, and you can see it in the end, but it's no big deal. I use the a Copic friendly marker to go over the tops of these, and then you will never even know. I am also going to finish this off with a healthy dose of Nouveau Aqua Shimmer. Again, I stick strictly to the highlights of the petals and the highlights of the leaves. I use a Sakura black glaze pen to add some dots to this. I mount this to a top folding note card, and I call it good. I thoroughly enjoyed making this card. It is such a rare thing that I get to sit down with really no real expectation on how it's going to turn out. Now, yeah, I had an idea going on in the back of my head, but I didn't realize it at the time, and that was totally fine. And that's what makes this so fun. To me, that is what creativity is all about. And there's so many different stamp sets out there that you can definitely do this with. And I will have a few of my favorites linked down below, as well as over my blog if you're interested in those. That is it, folks. We're done. We are good to go. I hope you enjoyed my card today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.